Section 7 of the Ingoldsby Legends, First Series. This recording is in the public domain. The Ingoldsby Legends, First Series, by Richard Harris Barham. Section 7. Within an hour all Canterbury was in commotion. A friar had been murdered. 2 friars. 10. 20. A whole convent had been assaulted, sacked, burnt. All the monks had been killed, and all the nuns had been kissed. Murder, fire, sacrilege. Never was city in such an uproar. From St. George's Gate to St. Dunstan's suburb, from the Don John to the borough of Staplegate, all was noise and hubbub. Where was it? When was it? How was it? The mayor caught up his chain. The aldermen donned their furred gowns. The town clerk put on his spectacles. Who was he? What was he? Where was he? He should be hanged. He should be burned. He should be broiled. He should be fried. He should be scraped to death with red-hot oyster shells. Who was he? What was his name? The abbot's apparitor drew forth his roll and read aloud. Sir Robert de Shurland, Knight Banneret, Baron of Shurland and Minster, and Lord of Sheppey. The mayor put his chain in his pocket. The aldermen took off their gowns. The town clerk put his pen behind his ear. It was a county business altogether. The sheriff had better call out the posse comitatus. While saints and sinners were thus leaguing against him, the Baron de Shurland was quietly eating his breakfast. He had passed a tranquil night, undisturbed by dreams of cowl or capuchin, nor was his appetite more affected than his conscience. On the contrary, he sat rather longer over his meal than usual. Luncheon time came, and he was ready as ever for his oysters. But scarcely had Dame Martin opened his first half-dozen, when the warder's horn was heard from the barbican. "Who the devil's that?" said Sir Robert. "I'm not at home, Periwinkle. I hate to be disturbed at meals, and I won't be home to anybody." "An't please your lordship," answered the seneschal, "Paul Prior hath given notice that there is a body." "Another body!" roared the Baron. "Am I to be everlastingly plagued with bodies? No time allowed me to swallow a morsel? Throw it into the moat." "So please you, my lord, it is a body of horse, and Paul says there is a still larger body afoot behind it, and he thinks, my lord, that is, he does not know, but he thinks, and we all think, my lord, that they are coming to besiege the castle." "Besiege the castle? Who? What? What for?" "Paul says, my lord, that he can see the banner of St. Austin, and the bleeding heart of Hamo de Crevecoeur, the abbot's chief vassal, and there is John de Northwood, the sheriff, with his red cross engrailed, and Haver, and Leybourne, and heaven knows how many more, and they are all coming on as fast as ever they can." "Periwinkle," said the Baron, "up with the drawbridge, down with the portcullis, bring me a cup of canary and my nightcap. I won't be bothered with them. I shall go to bed." "To bed, my lord?" cried Periwinkle, with a look that seemed to say, "He's crazy." At this moment the shrill tones of a trumpet were heard to sound thrice from the champaign. It was the signal for parley. The Baron changed his mind. Instead of going to bed, he went to the ramparts. "Well, rapscallions, and what now?" said the Baron. A herald, 2 pursuivants, and a trumpeter occupied the foreground of the scene. Behind them, some 300 paces off, upon a rising ground, was drawn up in battle array the main body of the ecclesiastical forces. "Hear you, Robert of Shurland, Knight, Baron of Shurland and Minster, and Lord of Sheppey, and know all men, by these presents, that I do hereby attach you, the said Robert, of murder and sacrilege, now, or of late, done and committed by you, the said Robert, contrary to the peace of our sovereign lord the king, his crown and dignity, and I do hereby require and charge you, the said Robert, to forthwith surrender and give up your own proper person, together with the castle of Shurland aforesaid, in order that the same may be duly dealt with according to law. And here standeth John de Northwood, Esquire, good man and true, Sheriff of this his Majesty's most loyal county of Kent, to enforce the same, if need be, with his posse comitatus. His what? Said the Baron. His posse comitatus, and— Go to Bath, said the Baron. A defiance so contemptuous roused the ire of the adverse commanders. A volley of missiles rattled against the Baron's ears. Nightcaps avail little against contusions. He left the walls and returned to the great hall. Let them pelt away, quoth the Baron. There are no windows to break, and they can't get in. So he took his afternoon nap, and the siege went on. Towards evening his lordship awoke, and grew tired of the din. Guy Pearson, too, had got a black eye from a brickbat, and the assailants were clambering over the outer wall. So the Baron called for his Sunday hauberk of Milan steel, and his great two-handed sword with the terrible name. It was the fashion in feudal times to give names to swords. King Arthur's was christened Excalibur. The Baron called his Tickletoby, and whenever he took it in hand, it was no joke. Up with the portcullis, down with the bridge, said Sir Robert, and out he sallied, followed by the elite of his retainers. Then there was a pretty to-do. Heads flew one way, arms and legs another. Round went Tickletoby, and wherever it alighted, down came horse and man. The Baron excelled himself that day. All that he had done in Palestine faded in the comparison. He had fought for fun there, but now it was for life and lands. Away went John de Northwood, away went William of Hever, and Roger of Leybourne. Hamo de Crevecoeur, with the church vassals and the banner of St. Austin, had been gone some time. The siege was raised, and the Lord of Sheppey was left alone in his glory. But brave as the Baron undoubtedly was, and total as had been the defeat of his enemies, it cannot be supposed that La Stoccata would be allowed to carry it away thus. It has before been hinted that Abbot Anselm had written to the Pope, and Boniface VIII piqued himself on his punctuality as a correspondent in all matters connected with church discipline. He sent back an answer by return of post, and by it all Christian people were strictly enjoined to aid in exterminating the offender, on pain of the greater excommunication in this world, and 1,000,000 of years of purgatory in the next. But then again, Boniface VIII was rather at a discount in England just then. He had affronted Longshanks, as the loyal lieges had nicknamed their monarch, and Longshanks had been rather sharp upon the clergy in consequence. If the Baron de Shurland could but get the king's pardon for what, in his cooler moments, he admitted to be a peccadillo, he might sniff at the Pope, and bid him do his devilmost. Fortune, who, as the poet says, delights to favour the bold, stood his friend on this occasion. Edward had been for some time collecting a large force on the coast of Kent, to carry on his French wars for the recovery of Guienne. He was expected shortly to review it in person, but then the troops lay principally in cantonments about the mouth of the Thames, and his Majesty was to come down by water. What was to be done? The royal barge was in sight, and John de Northwood, and Hamo de Crevecoeur had broken up all the boats to boil their camp kettles. A truly great mind is never without resources. " Bring me my boots," said the Baron. They brought him his boots, and his dapple grey steed along with them. Such a courser, all blood and bone, short-backed, broad-chested, and, but that he was a little ewe-necked, faultless in form and figure. The Baron sprang upon his back, and dashed at once into the river. The barge which carried Edward Longshanks and his fortunes had by this time nearly reached the Nore. The stream was broad and the current strong, but Sir Robert and his steed were almost as broad, and a great deal stronger. After breasting the tide gallantly for a couple of miles, the knight was near enough to hail the steersman. " What have we got here? " said the king. " It's a mermaid," said one. " It's a grampus," said another. " It's the devil," said a third. But they were all wrong. It was only Robert de Shurland. " Gramercy," said the king, " that fellow was never born to be drowned." It has been said before that the Baron had fought in the Holy Wars. In fact, he had accompanied Longshanks, when only heir apparent, in his expedition 25 years before, although his name is unaccountably omitted by Sir Harris Nicolas in his list of Crusaders. He had been present at Acre when Amirand of Joppa stabbed the prince with a poisoned dagger, and had lent Princess Eleanor his own toothbrush after she had sucked out the venom from the wound. He had slain certain Saracens, contented himself with his own plunder, and never dunned the commissariat for arrears of pay. Of course, he ranked high in Edward's good graces, and had received the honour of knighthood at his hands on the field of battle. In one so circumstanced it cannot be supposed that such a trifle as the killing of a frowsy friar would be much resented, even had he not taken so bold a measure to obtain his pardon. His petition was granted, of course, as soon as asked, and so it would have been had the indictment drawn up by the Canterbury town clerk, viz., that he, the said Robert de Shurland, etc., had then and there, with several, to wit, 1,000 pairs of boots, given sundry, to wit, 2,000 kicks, and therewith and thereby killed divers, to wit, 10,000 Austin friars, been true to the letter. Thrice did the gallant Grey circumnavigate the barge, while Robert de Winchelsea, the Chancellor and Archbishop to boot, was making out, albeit with great reluctance, the royal pardon. The interval was sufficiently long to enable his Majesty, who, gracious as he was, had always an eye to business, just to hint that the gratitude he felt towards the Baron was not unmixed with a lively sense of services to come, and that, if life were now spared him, common decency must oblige him to make himself useful. Before the Archbishop, who had scalded his fingers with the wax in affixing the Great Seal, had time to take them out of his mouth, all was settled, and the Baron de Shurland had pledged himself to be forthwith in readiness, cum suis, to accompany his liege lord to Guienne. With the royal pardon secured in his vest, boldly did his lordship turn again to the shore, and as boldly did his courser oppose his breadth of chest to the stream. It was a work of no common difficulty or danger. A steed of less metal and bone had long since sunk in the effort. As it was, the Baron's boots were full of water, and grey Dolphin's chamfron more than once dipped beneath the wave. The convulsive snorts of the noble animal showed his distress. Each instant they became more loud and frequent, when his hoof touched the strand, and the horse and his rider stood once again in safety on the shore. Rapidly dismounting, the Baron was loosening the girths of his demi-pique, to give the panting animal breath, when he was aware of as ugly an old woman as he had ever clapped eyes upon, peeping at him under the horse's belly. " Make much of your steed, Robert Shurland, make much of your steed," cried the hag, shaking at him her long and bony finger. " Groom to the hide, and corn to the manger. He has saved your life, Robert Shurland, for the nonce, but he shall yet be the means of your losing it, for all that." The Baron started. " What's that you say, you old faggot ?" He ran round by his horse's tail. The woman was gone. The Baron paused. His great soul was not to be shaken by trifles. He looked around him, and solemnly ejaculated the word " humbug," then slinging the bridle across his arm, walked slowly on in the direction of the castle. The appearance, and still more the disappearance of the crone had, however, made an impression. Every step he took he became more thoughtful. " 'Twould be deuced provoking, though, if he should break my neck after all." He turned and gazed at Dolphin with the scrutinizing eye of a veterinary surgeon. " I'll be shot if he is not groggy," said the Baron. " With his lordship, like another great commander, once to be in doubt was once to be resolved. It would never do to go to the wars on a rickety prad." He dropped the rein, drew forth Tickletoby, and, as the enfranchised Dolphin, good easy horse, stretched out his ewe neck to the herbage, struck off his head at a single blow. " There, you lying old beldam," said the Baron, " now take him away to the knackers." 3 years were come and gone. King Edward's French wars were over. Both parties, having fought till they came to a standstill, shook hands, and the quarrel, as usual, was patched up by a royal marriage. This happy event gave his Majesty leisure to turn his attention to Scotland, where things, through the intervention of William Wallace, were looking rather queerish. As his reconciliation with Philip now allowed of his fighting the Scotch in peace and quietness, the monarch lost no time in marching his long legs across the border, and the short ones of the Baron followed him, of course. At Falkirk, Tickletoby was in great request, and in the year following we find a contemporary poet hinting at his master's prowess under the walls of Carlaverock. Avec ou fut acheminé le bon Robert de Shurland, qui quand se voit sur le cheval ne semble homme que sommeil. A quatrain which Mr. Simpkinson translates, "With them was marching the good Robert de Shurland, who when seated on horseback does not resemble a man asleep." So thoroughly awake indeed does he seem to have proved himself, that the bard subsequently exclaims in an ecstasy of admiration, " Si je étois une pousolette, je lui donnerais cœur et corps, tant est de lui bon le record." If I were a young maiden, I would give my heart and person, so great is his fame. Fortunately the poet was a tough old monk of Exeter, since such a present to a nobleman, now in his grand climacteric, would hardly have been worth the carriage. With the reduction of this stronghold of the Maxwells seemed to have concluded the Baron's military services, as on the very first day of the 14th century we find him once more landed on his native shore, and marching, with such of his retainers as the wars had left him, towards the hospitable shelter of Shurland Castle. It was then, upon that very beach, some 100 yards distant from high water mark, that his eye fell upon something like an ugly old woman in a red cloak. She was seated on what seemed to be a large stone, in an interesting attitude, with her elbows resting upon her knees, and her chin upon her thumbs. The Baron started. The remembrance of his interview with a similar personage, in the same place, some 3 years since, flashed upon his recollection. He rushed towards the spot, but the form was gone. Nothing remained but the seat it had appeared to occupy. This, on examination, turned out to be no stone, but the whitened skull of a dead horse. A tender remembrance of the deceased grey Dolphin shot a momentary pang into the Baron's bosom. He drew the back of his hand across his face. The thought of the hag's prediction in an instant rose and banished all softer emotions. In utter contempt of his own weakness, yet with a tremor that deprived his redoubtable kick of half its wonted force, he spurned the relic with his foot. One word alone issued from his lips, elucidatory of what was passing in his mind. It long remained imprinted on the memory of his faithful followers. That word was gammon. The skull bounded across the beach till it reached the very margin of the stream. One instant more, and it would be engulfed forever. At that moment, a loud "ha, ha, ha!" was distinctly heard by the whole train to issue from its bleached and toothless jaws. It sank beneath the flood in a horse laugh. Meanwhile, Sir Robert de Shurland felt an odd sort of sensation in his right foot. His boots had suffered in the wars. Great pains had been taken for their preservation. They had been soled and healed more than once. Had they been galoshed, their owner might have defied fate. Well has it been said that there is no such thing as a trifle. A nobleman's life depended upon a question of ninepence. The Baron marched on. The uneasiness in his foot increased. He plucked off his boot. A horse's tooth was sticking in his great toe. The result may be anticipated. Lame as he was, his lordship, with characteristic decision, would hobble on to Shurland. His walk increased the inflammation. A flagon of aquavitae did not mend matters. He was in a high fever. He took to his bed. Next morning the toe presented the appearance of a Bedfordshire carrot. By dinner time it had deepened to beetroot, and when Bargrave the leech at last sliced it off, the gangrene was too confirmed to admit of remedy. Dame Martin thought it high time to send for Miss Margaret, who ever since her mother's death had been living with her maternal aunt, the abbess, in the Ursuline convent at Greenwich. The young lady came, and with her came one Master Ingoldsby, her cousin german by the mother's side, but the Baron was too far gone in the dead thaw to recognise either. He died as he lived, unconquered and unconquerable. His last words were, "Tell the old hag she may go to—" whither remains a secret. He expired without fully articulating the place of her destination. But who and what was the crone who prophesied the catastrophe? Ay, that is the mystery of this wonderful history. Some say it was Dame Fothergill, the late confessor's mamma. Others, Saint Bridget herself. Others thought it was nobody at all, but only a phantom conjured up by conscience. As we do not know, we decline giving an opinion. And what became of the Clerk of Chatham? Mr. Simpkinson avers that he lived to a good old age, and was at last hanged by Jack Cade, with his inkhorn about his neck, for setting boys' copies. In support of this he adduces his name, Emmanuel, and refers to the historian Shakespeare. Mr. Peters, on the contrary, considers this to be what he calls one of Mr. Simpkinson's anachronisms, inasmuch as, at the introduction of Mr. Cade's reform measure, the clerk, if alive, would have been hard upon 200 years old. The probability is that the unfortunate alluded to was his great-grandson. Margaret Shurland in due course became Margaret Ingoldsby. Her portrait still hangs in the gallery at Tappington. The features are handsome, but shrewish, betraying, as it were, a touch of the old Baron's temperament. But we never could learn that she actually kicked her husband. She brought him a very pretty fortune in chains, ouches, and Saracen earrings. The barony, being a male fief, reverted to the crown. In the Abbey church at Minster may yet be seen the tomb of a recumbent warrior, clad in the chain mail of the 13th century. Footnote: subsequent to the first appearance of the foregoing narrative, the tomb alluded to has been opened during the course of certain repairs which the church has undergone. Mr. Simpkinson, who was present at the exhumation of the body within, and has enriched his collection with 3 of its grinders, says the bones of one of the great toes were wanting. He speaks in terms of great admiration at the thickness of the skull, and is of opinion that the skeleton is that of a great patriot much addicted to Lundyfoot. His hands are clasped in prayer, his legs crossed in that position so prized by Templars in ancient and tailors in modern days, bespeak him a soldier of the faith in Palestine. Close behind his dexter calf lies sculptured in bold relief a horse's head, and a respectable elderly lady, as she shows the monument, fails not to read her auditors a fine moral lesson on the sin of ingratitude, or to claim a sympathizing tear to the memory of poor Grey Dolphin. Section 7.